Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden. 5 games tonight, small Tuesday slate. I was telling you before the show, this is probably one of the weirdest groups of player pools that I've ever seen. Like, just how lineup construction is going to go tonight. It's odd. Like, I haven't seen anything like this in a while.
Yeah, it is kind of weird, and depending on how injury news shakes out with like Jeff Teague and Devin Booker, it'll turn into like a pretty straightforward night where you just lock in a couple of the value plays and then build around those guys. Kind of like last night after all the injury news that came out, with all the Warriors and all that stuff. So hopefully we get that news early on, and it makes us slate a little bit easier to digest.
Yeah. First game here, we'll take a look at Cleveland and Miami. 209 total. Cleveland 5-point favorites. Cleveland obviously on the back-to-back, but not really worried about that one there. With Miami, it's pretty much going to be the backcourt guys for me. Goran Dragic, Dejan Waiters, I don't mind. Both reasonably priced. Obviously, both have the highest usage on the Heat. That's kind of it for me there for on the Miami side.
Yeah, there's a few guys here I'm interested in. Obviously, it is a Dion Waiters revenge game going against Cleveland, so you have that narrative if you're someone that wants to play that. We did see him in one of the games last year against Cleveland put up like 40-something fantasy points because he just shot like nonstop. He's fine. Dragic is obviously the guy that I'm the most interested in. I know Cleveland's defense has been better. I know they held Philly in check last night, but I mean, they're still terrible against point guards. They're still giving up a decent amount of points here. Dragic is coming in hot. Like, I mean, he's been outstanding recently. I wrote him up in the GPP article, but 3 straight games over 30 fantasy point. He's been shooting the ball really well. He's a guy that I have a ton of interest in here at the point guard position.
Yeah, when the point guard position's funny tonight because it really is guys filling in for injuries and just kind of cheap rotational guys. And then you have, kind of Dragic and Bledsoe up top as your firm solid options.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Dragic is like the most expensive like point guard that's probably actually going to play. Like Dragic and Bledsoe on FanDuel are pretty much the same price, but like Teague may sit, and then it just leaves like these two guys in the mid range as the two expensive point guards. That makes things a little bit strange. I don't mind Tyler Johnson though. Like if you need a cheap punt option, obviously the minutes continue to be up and down with him, but it is a matchup that he could take advantage of here.
We were kind of talking about Hassan Whiteside, and it kind of seems like this is my take as far as the centers go tonight. Like as far as the top end options, I'm just kind of. I mean, they're all tournament guys for me. Like, I'm not really going to be paying up in cash games for Whiteside. It's not a bad spot for him, but he hasn't shown a ton of upside, over the last, maybe 2 weeks or so outside of one game. He just kind of continues to be a guy that's kind of hit or miss, and I don't know how much I'll be going into him tonight.
Yeah, I'm curious how much that knee is actually bothering him. We've seen over the past like 4 games, his minutes have been pretty low. And he's fine in GPPs. I don't think you can go there in cash just because they have other guys like with Kevin Love playing center for Cleveland. Like they don't have to keep Whiteside out there. They can throw Kelly Olynyk out there. They can throw James Johnson, who's an excellent defender, out there. So they don't have to run Whiteside out for 30 plus minutes. Obviously, he could have a slate breaking performance here, but I think the odds are more likely that he doesn't and that he only plays 24, 25 minutes and just kind of puts up a pretty poor performance. I mentioned James Johnson. I actually have a lot of interest in him. The minutes have been fine for him recently. Obviously, he's coming off a pretty big game last time out against Chicago, but before that, 29 minutes, 21, 27, 31. So the minutes pretty consistent there for him. So I do have a lot of interest in James Johnson here. And at power forward on FanDuel, there's not a lot of places to go. So he's a guy that you could look at.
Yeah, no, I like that call. On the Cleveland side, obviously LeBron comes in as one of the higher priced options. Once again, have no issue. I don't feel like we need to talk about LeBron, just given his play this season, or maybe in his career. He's been a pretty good player, wouldn't you say?
I'd say so. One last guy for Miami, actually Wayne Ellington is someone that I do have some interest in, and only at like close to min salary across the industry. An excellent 3-point shooter. He's been shooting really well recently. Minutes have started to climb up there, so I don't mind going there. But you mentioned LeBron. it is a revenge game for LeBron too, even though he left Miami to come back to Cleveland. But again, it's LeBron. He's well rested. He only played 31 minutes last night, so his legs should be fine. He should be rested. So if you want to play LeBron, I definitely wouldn't say no. I mean, he has probably the safest floor of anyone on the on the slate, and probably the highest ceiling outside of maybe Giannis tonight.
Yeah, I mean, he's just one. His shots just dropping this year. It's just been at an unreal rate. At 42% assist percentage, like he's just been stellar this year. It's just really hard to get away from him in all formats. I mean, even when he dropped 50 last night, like you were kind of hoping for like a bigger game, but like that's kind of the floor that he brings. So I have no issue paying his high price tags. Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of between him and Giannis as far as the top options tonight. So when we look at some of the other guys, Kevin Love's a little bit expensive for me on this slate. Like he's always going to be a guy that's playable in tournaments for me. I don't know how much exposure I'll have to him. I mean, I guess he's probably more in play for me over on DraftKings, actually.
Yeah, I don't want to touch him on FanDuel just because I don't want to lock him into the center position. If you're looking on DraftKings, I think he's an excellent GPP option.
Yeah. Guys like Dwayne Wade, J.R. Smith, any interest there? Dwayne Wade's been a tough guy because he's up and down this year. It's also another spot where, he's playing Miami. I don't know how much of a revenge you really want to call that, but it is there.
Yeah, it's there for sure. I want to wait and see if there's any news. Like he played 25 minutes last night. It's Dwayne Wade. They could rest him. It happened last year with Chicago. They rested him against Miami, I believe, once or twice. I don't know if he plays. I do have a little bit of interest in him. He's 5,300 on DraftKings. I know he's 55 on FanDuel. I don't mind him here. He's going to come into the game. He's going to shoot a lot. He's been pretty good with that second unit. So definitely don't mind going there. Don't mind going with J.R. Smith as well. Might want to monitor the status of J.R. Smith. He found out yesterday that his cousin had passed away yesterday morning, I believe. So that's some news to keep an eye on. He could, maybe take some time away from the team, kind of like Jaylen Brown did. So a little bit of news there to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's been kind of a rough week. We saw Jaylen Brown, J.R. Smith. I know Robert Covington had something similar before yesterday's game as well. It's rough stuff.
That is, and stuff like that really affects players. So really is something to keep an eye on. So if J.R. Smith or Dwayne Wade sits, that's going to open up some minutes. I wouldn't mind maybe a Jeff Green punt or something like that.
Yeah, Jeff Green, I don't mind. Jay Crowder's another one who's just hasn't been great this year. I mean, 0.6 fantasy points per minute. He's cheap. He's playing minutes, but the production and the usage just really isn't there.
Yeah, I just don't want to. I don't want to try to trust Jay Crowder in the spot.
No. Washington, Minnesota, 213 total. Minnesota 5-point favorites. Obviously, we get John Wall out. A lot of people are going to gravitate towards Tim Frazier tonight. He's a guy that, I know you feel similar, where that floor, that ceiling really isn't that high in tournaments. I mean, there's plenty of other options around that range that you can go towards.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking cash games, obviously it's an excellent matchup for Frazier. He comes in and you can feel pretty confident that he's going to get you, 22, maybe 24 fantasy points. But like it looked like he was going to have a ceiling game over the weekend in the start, and then he just kind of bottomed out at like 21, 20 something fantasy points. So he's not a guy that you're going to luck in and feel comfortable that he's going to have a ceiling game. He's not. If you fade him in GPPs, I don't think he's going to be a guy that you regret fading. So cash games, he's fine. GPPs, easily fadeable.
Yeah. And obviously when we look at Washington, Bradley Beal without John Wall is something that we want to go to. He's probably going to be obviously one of the more popular plays tonight. With all the value on this slate, you really should have no issue fitting Beal into a lineup. Are you fading in GPPs at all?
I don't think so. Like there's enough ways you can go to be different tonight where you don't necessarily have to feel obligated to fade Beal. And that's something that you it depends on how you look at it. Like if you think that Jeff Teague sits, you could imagine that they're probably going to throw Jimmy Butler at Bradley Beal. And if that's the case, like I know Butler hasn't been great, but he could lock down Beal. So if that's how that situation shakes out, like I definitely would consider fading Beal and GPPs. Cash games again, it's really tough to turn down that usage rate that he has without Wall on the floor. You get a few extra shots, like I think he'll be fine. But I think in GPPs, if you see Jeff Teague sit out, like I do have some concern that they're just going to throw uh, Butler on Beal and try to lock him down.
Yeah, that is something. I know Otto Porter is the guy we're both looking at here. Another guy who sees a tick up in usage, tick up in production with Wall off. Porter's a guy that I'll probably have a ton of tonight here.
I absolutely love Otto Porter. I wrote him up in the GPP article. He sees a 4.3% usage boost without Wall on the floor. Wall was averaging about 16 shots per game. That's a lot of shots that fall to some of the other guys. Porter's a guy that sees 2 or 3 of those. We saw him come out last game, have a decent outing. He averages like over 4 fantasy points per game more with Wall off the floor. And again, I mentioned if they're going to throw Jimmy Butler on Bradley Beal tonight, that's kind of a funnel. If you would like, it's like going to funnel the offense into some other guys. So I could see Porter actually getting even a few extra shots. And he's a guy at that small forward position. It's kind of tough. Like you have LeBron and you have Giannis, and then it's not a whole lot else there. So he's a guy that I'm going to have a ton of exposure to here.
Yeah, like the front court goes. I mean, Markieff Morris, Marcin Gortat. Morris is definitely in play tonight. At power forward, which has just been it's extremely weak. I have a little bit of interest in Gortat and GPPs. We were talking before the show. You gave me his last 2 games from last year against Minnesota. It was 13 and 38 or something like that, and that really is his range of outcomes for tonight's slate. And we've seen it kind of over the last week where he's gotten a couple games in the 30s, but a sneaky good spot here. Minnesota 25th in defensive efficiency against centers. Towns obviously not the best. At his price tags, like I'm willing to take a shot. I mean, it's 4,900 on FanDuel. He's 5K on DraftKings. I think the minutes will be there tonight. I know they've been a little bit volatile, but in this matchup, I think Gortat should easily see 28 plus minutes.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's an excellent GPP option. There's a couple guys around his price range that I'd rather go in cash games. But if you're gonna do like a 2-center lineup or something like that, he's a guy that I would have some exposure to. And you mentioned Markieff Morris, obviously a very tough matchup going up against Taj Gibson, but I mean his price is still so cheap. He's gonna have a huge game at some point, and like I'm going to keep riding Markieff Morris until it happens. The minutes have started to climb up. We mentioned with Wall being out, there's more shots and usage to go around. Morris is a guy that sees a little bit of a boost. So I would expect at some point that he's going to break out and have a huge game, and he's a guy that I'm going to have some exposure to tonight.
Anyone off the bench for Washington there?
No, I don't really. Like Kelly Oubre's a little bit interesting, but his price is kind of too high right now.
On the other side of that one, we got Minnesota. Obviously, if Jeff Teague sits, we're going to see Tyler Ulis become, or sorry, not Ulis, Tyus Jones. We're going to see him become probably a pretty popular play. A lot of his points have been driven off of defensive peripheral stats, over the 2 games. But that's something I think that can somewhat continue to give him a floor if he does play.
Yeah, I mean, he's 4,300 on DraftKings. He's let's see, what is he on FanDuel? He's 5,200 on FanDuel. Like, if you want to fade Tim Frazier and get someone with at least with a ceiling, like a high ceiling, I think Tyus Jones is the better option there. I would absolutely love going back to that well in cash and GPPs if we see Jeff Teague sit out.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, I'm kind of hoping that's the case because I just want to plug him in. And we've seen no issues with his minutes. Like, he's played starter minutes over the 2 games that Teague has missed. So, it's kind of like Frazier where we see him play a little bit limited.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the steals, 7 against Phoenix, 4 against Miami, but he's also contributing other stats. Like, he's getting the assists, he's getting the rebounds, he's getting the points. Add in a couple blocks there. Like he's a pretty safe option in this spot.
Yeah. As far as the other guys here, I mean, I have some interest in Jimmy Butler tonight's slate. He's just going to be probably a GPP pivot away from, those 2 expensive small forwards tonight. Like, I don't mind going with him. Just once again, he's all about those peripheral stats if he's going to hit a 40-plus fantasy point ceiling because he's not going to do it on scoring alone.
Yeah, he's fine. I think you can definitely go to Jimmy Butler in all formats, even if Jeff Teague plays. If Jeff Teague sits out, I think I prefer Andrew Wiggins a little bit more. We saw him play 41 minutes against Phoenix, 39 against Miami, 41 against Orlando. Like the minutes have been through the roof for this guy. Price isn't really up there where it should be. Like I would prefer to see him over 7K if you're talking DraftKings. Um, what is he 6,800 on FanDuel? Like he's a guy that sees a little bit of boost without Teague there because there's some extra shots and things like that to go around. And we know with Wiggins, he's heavily dependent on scoring. Doesn't really do much else. So if Teague sits out, like I have a lot of interest in Wiggins.
Yep. Front court guys, Taj Gibson, Karl Anthony Towns. Gibson, I don't mind here. It's not the greatest of spots, but I don't mind him. He just kind of continuously produces what you want, a decent cash game guy. Karl Anthony Towns, a little expensive. I don't know how much I'll be able to kind of get him into lineups, given the fact that I want to get some other guys in. He's just going to be a tournament guy for me tonight.
Yeah, with Taj, I think it's going to depend on if Bielitsa sits, because that's kind of helped his minutes recently. But we've seen 40, 37, and 37 over the last three, a couple 40-point outings. He's an excellent option here tonight in cash games. I don't know that I want to go there in GPPs just because his salary is kind of a little too high in the spot. And as far as Towns goes, we saw him come out last game, actually put up an excellent outing. This was right after Tom Thibodeau kind of criticized him for his recent play. He took 26 shots against the Suns. I don't expect him to do that again tonight. Not the greatest of matchups against Gortat, but it's definitely a spot you could go to in GPPs.
Yep. And as usual with Minnesota, there's no one really off the bench that comes into play because they all play 35 plus minutes.
Yeah, for the most part. I don't mind Jeff Teague if he plays. I would expect maybe his minutes to trend down just a little bit since he's coming off an Achilles injury, but I definitely don't mind going there.
Yeah. Phoenix and Chicago next year, two playoff contenders. We get a battle here.
Lottery contenders.
This game obviously opens up a ton of value to poor defenses. Like, as bad as these two teams are, like, there's definitely some fantasy goodness to be had here.
There's pretty much everyone in play from this game. Like, both teams terrible on defense. Both teams are just terrible all around. It's expected to be a close, high-scoring game. I'm actually shocked to see Chicago favored in this one. It's really shocking to see Chicago favored in this game.
Yeah, it is. And as you said, it's going to be high scoring. Both teams implied over 105. I'll start this Phoenix side here first. I expect Devin Booker to play tonight. I definitely don't mind him. I think he's a great pivot away from Beal if you're looking to go that way in GPPs. 29% usage rate this year. He's going to see a ton of shots. Obviously, we know he's going to play heavy minutes as long as he's healthy. And also, it's a good spot here. Chicago struggles against shooting guards.
I mean, they struggle against everyone, so I'll take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, it is an excellent spot for Devin Booker. I'd like to see that he's back in the lineup, but he should be fine. I think he came out yesterday and said the toe is feeling much better. So if he plays, I don't mind using him. I don't mind using him and Beal together. Price at 8,100 on DraftKings is a little tough to get in there, depending on how you go about your lineup construction. 7,100 on FanDuel is just way too cheap. Like, I'm shocked FanDuel actually has better pricing today than DraftKings.
Yeah, that 7,100 on FanDuel is really intriguing. Then we obviously jump to, a TJ Warren. He's a guy I feel was a little expensive for me. He's probably the one that, I'll probably get a little bit of exposure to on tonight's slate, but 74 on FanDuel, 73 on DK is just a little bit pricey.
Yeah, it's coming off two really bad games against Minnesota and New Orleans. Struggled without Booker last game. I kind of don't really have interest in Warren if Booker sits. If Booker plays, I do have some interest in him. He's scored in double digits in 12 straight games. He's scored at least 20 in 6 of those games. I mean, there aren't a lot of places to go here at small forward if you're not going to double stack the studs. So, I mean, I definitely don't mind going there. I know the price is a little high, but we've seen the upside out of him.
Yeah, we have. I think for me, it's kind of just looking at, you got Denzel Valentine, who's, much cheaper. Otto Porter in a similar price tag, except Porter's actually about $1,000 cheaper than Warren on DraftKings.
Yeah, Porter's is probably the better play on DraftKings. On FanDuel, they're pretty much the same price, so it's kind of a toss up there.
Yep. As far as like the backcourt guys go, I mean, it's been pretty split. Except I know you have some interest in Mike James.
Yeah, it's just more of like what he provides for the team. Like he's a guy that comes off the bench. I know he's still splitting minutes, but we saw against Minnesota he played 30 minutes. We saw against Chicago last time he played 26. He just takes a ton of shots when he's on the floor, and like Triano's going to stick with him if he's hitting those shots. So if you're looking between Mike James and Tyler Ulis and GPPs, I like James a lot more. I would expect, especially if Phoenix is struggling, for him to actually see a few extra minutes and just outplay Ulis. Ulis just he doesn't really do that much scoring. Like I know he has 2 games over his last like 4 where he scored double digits, but like he's talked in the past about how he kind of prefers just to be out there and get those assists and things like that. So just don't have a lot of interest. I think Mike James is probably the way to go just because his skill set kind of lines up with the flaws in Chicago's defense tonight.
Yeah, Ulis, 0.77 fantasy points per minute this year. James, 0.98. He's just clearly been a better fantasy guy. So, yeah, I'm with you there. Front court, it's always a disaster to talk about. We got Greg Monroe, Alex Len, Marquise Chris, Tyson Chandler, like all these guys that are just kind of it's musical chairs in terms of where they're actually going to start or play in the game. So I don't have a ton of interest because I rather go with Robin Lopez or use a Marcin Gortat at this spot. So I'm kind of off the front court.
I have a little interest in Tyson Chandler. I mean, his minutes are pretty secure. Like you don't see him dipping below 20 in any of his games, usually higher, 25, upwards of close to 30. I mean, he's a guy that can pretty much just come in and get you like 24, 25 fantasy points. He's 4,400 on DraftKings. He's still pretty cheap on FanDuel. Like he would be the guy that I would look at here.
Anyone else off Phoenix?
No, not really.
On the Chicago side, I have some interest in quite a few guys here. I don't mind Chris Dunn and GPPs. I know Jerry and Grant's a little bit cheaper. He's been playing pretty well. I guess this whole starting five, I don't have an issue with for Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about both with the point guards. I think I prefer Grant just because he's been playing so much better, and he's kind of talked about how he enjoys his role as far as with doing stuff with the second unit. Obviously, he's looked significantly better over the past 2 games. I think I prefer him over Chris Dunn just because he's significantly cheaper. Like Chris Dunn is 6,100 on DraftKings. That's just stupid. That's kind of how I would go. Like I think Grant is in play in cash and GPPs. Dunn, of course, if you want to pay that price for him, you can go there in GPPs.
Yeah, 61 on DK is pretty steep. I don't mind the 61 on FanDuel because he's going to be a pivot away from some of those other cheaper guys like Frazier. Justin Holiday's a guy I don't mind. He's playing heavy minutes. Not the greatest fantasy points per minute guy, but obviously if he's playing 35, I'm okay with him. He's 5,500 on both sites. It's obviously a good spot against Phoenix. So Holiday's probably a decent, probably shooting guard 2 on FanDuel if I'm looking at it.
Yeah, he's fine. I mean, all he does really is shoot. Like he has a couple games where he has double-digit rebounds this season, but he's just more of a guy that just stands around and shoots the ball. So he's heavily reliant on his scoring. I think the guy that I'm most interested in is Denzel Valentine, who's been just outstanding so far this season, coming off a huge game against Miami where he put up 45 fantasy points. He has close to double-digit rebounds in several games this season. Double-digit scoring games. He chips in on the assist, gets the steals, and he's playing a bunch of minutes. So he's a guy that I do have a lot of interest in, even at his elevated price tag.
Yeah, 6,200 at FanDuel. 56 on DK is definitely not bad for his recent production. I'm with you there, especially with Phoenix. You mentioned the rebounds. Phoenix obviously allowing the most rebounds to opponents this season. Valentine's probably one of my favorite small forwards on this slate, one of my favorite kind of mid-range values. Front court, obviously Markkanen's a guy I know you're looking at tonight. Robin Lopez is as well. Like 2 pretty solid mid-range value plays in good spots.
Yeah, we saw Markkanen have, I think it was the best game of his, of the season against against the Suns last time out, he put up 26 points, 13 rebounds. We know the Suns struggle to defend in the paint. They struggle to rebound. So this is a spot where I definitely think you see him bounce back after a couple, not so great outings. Against Miami, he was actually outstanding. Had a 11 point, 10 rebound, double double. And if you're getting a guy that's able to do that against Miami, like just imagine the ceiling he has here against the Suns. I wrote about it in the GPP article, so I'll leave a few things to the imagination and let people click on that and give it a read. But there are several areas where Markkanen is just really good this season, and there are areas where Phoenix really struggles on defense. So absolutely love him. I don't mind Portis if you need a cheaper power forward option. And Robin Lopez is a guy that I think is like my cash game sitter pretty much on all sites.
Yeah, Lopez, really cheap, 5K on DraftKings, 4,900. He's definitely that safer alternative to Gortat in that price range.
Yeah, and with you expect him to at least be out there for the minutes that Chandler is out there because you kind of need another big to kind of deal with him down low. So if you expect Chandler to play 28 minutes, then you can expect, 28, 30 minutes of Robin Lopez. Played 30 minutes against the Suns last time out, had 16 points, 10 rebounds, almost 30 fantasy points. Like, he's 4,900 on DraftKings. He's at right at 5K on FanDuel. I'll take 30 fantasy points at that price.
Yeah, definitely. Denver, Utah next. You got 207 total here. On the Denver side of things, I don't have a lot of interest in this game in general. You can always take a look at Jokic and GPPs. We obviously have, Paul Millsap. We're still dealing with that rotation. With power forward, we're still waiting on Wilson Chandler news for tonight's game. Like, we could see Kenneth Faried slip in and play some minutes like he did last game. I kind of just want consistent minutes for Faried for his sake because I like Faried, but not for my personal fantasy,
Yeah, I'm not going near Faried tonight. Like, if Wilson Chandler sits, he has a little bit more intriguing because they kind of have to play somebody. But man, I can't trust Mike Malone to run Faried out there for a bunch of minutes, and then of course you have Faried and his injury history. I think a point that people are going to try to hammer home tonight is that the Jazz defense is terrible without Rudy Gobert, and while there are flaws in their defense, they're not terrible. Over the last 8 games without Rudy Gobert, they're only allowing 102.4 points per game. Like, their defense has been really good without Gobert. So I don't have a ton of interest here in Denver. Jokic and GPPs, Barton and Gary Harris are interesting options. If Chandler sits, Barton becomes an excellent play. And I think you can just use Gary Harris in all formats.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will go and look at Faried in tournaments, so I will differ a little bit from you. I had 3,900 on DK. Like, if you're going stars and scrubs and kind of hoping that Faried can get 20 plus minutes in this one, it's worth a shot for me in GPPs if you're making multiple lineups. Obviously, very tough to trust. He can ruin your lineups, as we've seen often before. 4,600 on FanDuel. There's other options. There's Portis, who's right there. There's just Taj Gibson. Like, you can easily fade Faried on FanDuel. I think DraftKings, I have a little bit more interest.
Yeah, 3,900, it's really tough to bust unless you just don't get minutes, which could obviously happen. I would definitely monitor the Wilson Chandler news, and I don't think that I would go near Faried if Wilson Chandler plays.
Yeah, no, I agree there. Anyone else on Denver?
I don't want to try to predict the Moutier, Jamal Murray breakout here. If you're wanting to target it, like, I would probably lean Moutier just because he's, the cheaper of the options, but there's just so many other ways you can go tonight.
Yeah. On the Utah side of things, it's weird because we have Derek Favors topping the position in terms of salary. Donovan Mitchell's a little bit expensive for me on this slate. I don't like a ton of Utah guys here. Rodney Hood, I guess you can make the case for in GPPs.
It's basically Hood and Mitchell here. I know Mitchell's, expensive, but he's 6,500 on DraftKings. That's a fairly good price there. 73 on FanDuel. That's a little tough to imagine paying whenever you have Bradley Beal for 83. You have Booker for cheaper. You have Middleton, Wiggins, some of these other guys, but I don't mind either of those options. Those would be the two guys that I look at the most. Raul Neto is questionable for this game. If he sits, that's 19 19, 20 minutes that could fall to Rubio and Alec Burks and a couple of these other guys. So that's some news to keep an eye on. Joe Ingles is interesting just because of the price and the matchup here. He'd be a guy that I do have some interest in as well. And that's pretty much it. Like, I just don't want to go near favors at that price tag.
Yeah, you look at Rubio. I mean, Rubio hasn't been playing minutes really since the injury. 22, 23, 22, 16 over his last four. Like, I guess if he gets a tick up in minutes, like I'll have a little bit of interest, but probably not a ton.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Rubio, I mean, he's down to 5,400 on DraftKings. That's like the lowest price, I think, this season. If Howell Neto is out, and that's 20 minutes that has to be distributed to a few other people, you could see Rubio actually put up a few, get closer to 30 minutes. And we saw last time out against Denver, he played 31 minutes, put up 33 fantasy points at 5,400 and 5,700 on FanDuel. That's a pretty solid performance.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, I mean, Rubio's a guy I actually will have some interest in GPPs because that ownership is going to be super low, and that's not news that people are going to be following on today's slate.
Yeah, it really isn't. And interesting to note with Rubio, over the last 3 games, he's 5 for 8 from beyond the arc, so he's actually shooting some threes. Denver's a team that struggles against 3-point shooters, are allowing opponents to shoot friggin' almost 40% from 3-point range. So it's an added bonus to Rubio's game that we haven't really seen in the past.
Yep. Anyone else from Utah?
No, not really.
Milwaukee, Sacramento here, 200 total. It's the lowest of the night. Milwaukee, obviously the road team here. Giannis, LeBron, like there's the toss up on tonight's slate. I mean, who do you kind of have edging out? Is it LeBron?
I think it's Giannis. I really do. Like, I love LeBron in this matchup, but I think I'm going to lean towards Giannis for the most part. Like, there's just so many things that line up for him to have a good game. Sacramento coming on a back-to-back with all that travel that they had last night. Sorry, coming in on a back-to-back, they struggle to defend the rim. They're allowing opponents to shoot a decent amount in the paint, so things kind of line up for Giannis to have a huge game. He's coming off a somewhat down game against the Jazz, which is to be expected, but I think this is an excellent bounce back spot, and he's just a little bit cheaper than LeBron in a few, pretty much everywhere tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in agreement. Like, Giannis is a guy I kind of want to just lean towards in this spot. Like you said, a little bit cheaper than LeBron on tonight's slate. Milwaukee, I mean, I obviously have a lot of interest in as far as the other guys. Like, I'll look at Eric Bledsoe. It's a decent spot for him, especially at a weaker position. Like, you can put Dragic and Bledsoe in on FanDuel, and you don't even have to really worry about some of those other value guards. Like, I think that's kind of a good way to go.
Yeah, it's a decent way to kind of pivot away from some of the other options. Man, Bledsoe's price is up to 6,600 on DraftKings. I'm not sure what is he on FanDuel?
Yeah, he's 7K FanDuel.
He's shooting guard on FanDuel, isn't he? No, he's not. He used to be. He's point guard, 7K. I don't know that I'd want to go there on FanDuel, but it's an interesting spot. Like, I wish Giannis would sit this one. If Giannis sat this one out for some reason, I'd have a lot of interest in Bledsoe.
Middleton's always going to be that GPP guy who can pop off for these big games. And he's going to be really overlooked on tonight's slate because you have Booker in the price range. You have, Mitchell right there. You have obviously Beal. So I think Middleton's going to be a guy. I think if you want to fade Giannis and you still want exposure to the Bucks, I think Middleton's obviously an interesting GPP option. Yeah,
he's a guy you could look at, and it looks like Devin Booker will play tonight. So that news just came out. But yeah, Middleton's interesting. He's actually 20% of the time this season that he's been operating as the ball handler in the pick and roll. The Kings really do struggle to defend the ball handler. They're giving up 0.89 points per possession. They're allowing opponents to shoot like 50 or ball handlers to shoot like 53% from the floor. I think he's definitely an interesting pivot option off of some of the more expensive shooting guards on this slate.
Yeah, I think so. And, as far as the front court goes, God, John Henson just has a warm spot in my heart, but I don't know if I can go to him. I like him in GPPs tonight because it is a good spot for him.
I mean, he's 4,700 on DraftKings. He's over 23 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. I think he's power forward. So he's power forward on FanDuel at 5,500. That's a little bit tougher price, but like there's really not a lot of places to go. We're going to see the minutes kind of stay around the mid to high 20s. It is a good spot. The Kings really do struggle to defend centers. They're not a great rebounding team. I don't hate it. Like I could see going. I actually could see going there and cash games too.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, the FanDuel price, he's 5,500. I kind of like him there a little bit more because he is power forward eligible, and I don't have to use a center spot. I can still play Lopez or Gortat or pay up if I want. So, I mean, not that you don't have that flexibility on DraftKings either, but I think 55 on FanDuel, given the slate and how it kind of breaks down, like I don't hate it.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to look at it. And like I said, there's really not a lot of great power forward options in that price range. So I definitely don't mind going there.
Anyone else from Milwaukee?
No, I'm not gonna do the Gary Payton, Tony Snell roulette. Like I'm just not gonna go there.
On the Sacramento side, I don't have a ton of interest on this slate just because of the rotation. I think obviously Willie Cauley-Stein is probably the most attractive option in this spot. Once again, because I think he's been by far the most consistent, which isn't saying much with this King side.
Yeah, that really isn't saying that much. I think it's Willie Cauley-Stein and Zach Randolph for me. Like Zach Randolph only played 22 minutes last night. He's a guy that I would have a little bit of interest in. We've seen big men kind of demolish the Bucks down low. I think he could actually put up a pretty solid game, assuming he plays. We do want to keep an eye on news. They could rest Randolph or George Hill or something like that, and that could open up a few minutes for some other guys. I think I do want to caution people from the game log watchers out there with Frank Mason. He played 25 minutes last night, put up 24 fantasy points. He's 3K. Only reason he saw minutes is the Kings were down 31 points at the half last night. Dave Yeager basically just started his bench in the second half. Frank Mason picked up the majority of his minutes there. He's not a guy that you would expect to see a bunch of minutes in non-blowout situations. It is the Bucks. They're a decent team, so maybe they blow him out, but I don't really see that happening. So I would caution people against Frank Mason. The other games where he saw minutes were at the expense of Hield being injured or Hield just playing like crap. So I don't think you want to go back to the well here with Frank Mason.
No, and I think we've talked about so many cheap cards already. Like why do we have the need to go with Sacramento with guys like Garrett Temple? I get that we've seen a couple of games where they put up 25 fantasy points, but even on a 5-game slate, like I just still don't feel the need.
No, there really isn't a need. Like the only guy that I would maybe consider as far as like a guard from Sacramento would be De'Aaron Fox, and just kind of a GPP option there too.
Yeah, one, he's cheap and one of the better usage guys on that team.
Yep.
So that's it for us. 5-game slates. Highest score tonight that's not one of the higher centers and not LeBron or Giannis.
Dion Waiters.
Oh my goodness, man.
I'm gonna ride that revenge train. I think I'm gonna hook my boat up to Waiters Island and hope it doesn't sink.
Man, I'm gonna go Devin Booker here.
All right, I don't mind that option at all.
I could have said Beal. I could have went that route, or but yeah, I'll take Booker.
There you go.
So that's it for us. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Check out dailyfantasycafe.com, cheat sheets, optimizer, Brent's GPP picks article as well. And once again, good luck.
Good luck.